Family abandons him in nursing home, but what he did in his will left everyone speechless. Arthur Pennington awoke to the soft, persistent patter of rain against the window, the sound blending with the muted hues of the dimly lit room. The walls were painted a bland beige, a color that seemed to absorb the warmth and cheer of the world outside. It was a typical autumn morning in the small town of Maplewood, where the trees stood like sentinels, their leaves transitioning from vibrant greens to shades of gold and rust, falling gently to the ground like whispers of a fading summer. He turned his head slowly, each movement a reminder of the frailty that had come with age. The bed beneath him creaked, a familiar sound that echoed the loneliness he felt inside. At 82, Arthur had long ago resigned himself to the quiet solitude of the Maplewood Assisted Living Facility. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and fading flowers. But his thoughts drifted to brighter days, to laughter and the warmth of his children's embrace. As his gaze drifted to the window, he watched the leaves swirl in the wind, memories flooding back to him. He could almost hear the joyful shouts of his children as they played in the backyard, their laughter an echo of a time when life was filled with possibility. "Caroline! Jason! Come back here!" He could hear himself calling, his voice booming with mock authority as he chased them around the yard. The image was vivid, and for a moment he felt young again, as if the weight of years had lifted. With a sigh, Arthur sat up, the sheets rustling around him like the last remnants of a dream. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet meeting the cool wooden floor. Slipping on his slippers, he shuffled toward the small desk by the window, its surface cluttered with papers and a few well-worn photographs. He picked up a framed picture of his family from the desk, the edges chipped and yellowed with time. In it, he saw a younger version of himself, hair a little darker, eyes a little brighter, surrounded by Caroline and Jason, both grinning widely. "Look at us," he murmured to the empty room, a smile creeping across his face. "We were so happy then." The memory of that day came rushing back, a sunny afternoon spent on a picnic blanket spread out in the park. It was a day of laughter, of teaching his children how to ride their bicycles. He could almost hear Caroline's excited squeals as she wobbled and fell, her determination shining through her tears. "Just keep pedaling, sweetheart, you can do it," he had encouraged, his heart swelling with pride. Jason had been a bit more cautious, his brow furrowed in concentration as Arthur held on to the back of his seat. "You got this, buddy. Just trust yourself," he had said, the thrill of teaching filling him with a sense of purpose. "I won't let you fall." The echoes of that day danced in his mind, sweet and poignant. But now, as he looked out at the rain-drenched world beyond the glass, a heavy weight settled on his chest. The silence of the room reminded him of the distance that had grown between him and his children. A chasm filled with misunderstandings and unspoken words. "Arthur," a voice called from the hallway, pulling him from his reverie. It was Marge, one of the staff members at the facility. She had a kind face, framed by graying hair, and she always wore a cheerful smile, despite the surroundings. "Time for breakfast. You ready to join the others?" Arthur forced a smile, though it felt foreign. "I'll be there in a moment, Marge," he replied, his voice a mere whisper against the backdrop of his thoughts. He placed the photograph back on the desk, lingering over it for a moment before turning toward the door. As he made his way to the dining hall, the familiar sights of the facility greeted him. The worn carpets, the cheerful decorations that tried, in vain, to mask the underlying sadness of the place. He joined a small group of residents, already seated at a long table, their faces reflecting a mix of resignation and acceptance. The chatter was light, but Arthur felt isolated in the midst of it all. "Good morning, Arthur," called out Rose, a sprightly woman with a penchant for knitting. She sat across from him, her hands busy with yarn. "Did you see the leaves? They're so beautiful this time of year." "Yes, they are," he replied, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "Reminds me of the days when my children used to play in the leaves. We'd have the grandest of times." Rose nodded, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "Oh, I remember those days too. Children bring such joy, don't they?" Arthur's heart ached at her words. "They do, Rose. They really do." As breakfast was served, Arthur poked at his food, the routine of the meal feeling as bland as the walls around him. He glanced at the other residents, who were engrossed in their conversations, laughter occasionally bubbling up. But for Arthur, the laughter felt distant, like a melody played in another room. He cast his eyes around the table, observing the interactions, the warmth that seemed to elude him. After a few moments, he excused himself, needing a breather from the crowded room. He returned to his room, seeking solace in the solitude. Sitting on his bed, he thought about the days gone by, the moments that had shaped him, the laughter of his children, the love he had for his late wife, Evelyn, and the overwhelming sense of pride he felt as a father. But now, it felt as if those days were part of a different life, a life that had slipped through his fingers like sand. What happened to us? He whispered to himself, the question hanging heavy in the air. He picked up a pen and a piece of paper, the blank page staring back at him like a challenge. He had never been one for journaling, but he felt an urge to document his thoughts, to pour out the feelings that had been bottled up for so long. Maybe it would help him make sense of everything. "Today is a rainy day," he began, his handwriting shaky but determined. "The leaves outside remind me of my children, of laughter, of joy." He paused, the words flowing slowly as he tried to capture the essence of his memories. "I miss them. I wish things could be different." As he wrote, the door creaked open, and Helen, a fellow resident with a gentle smile and kind eyes, peeked in. "Arthur, are you busy?" "Not at all, Helen," he replied, gesturing for her to come in. "Just trying to remember some things." She walked in, her presence a comforting balm. "Remembering can be a beautiful thing," she said, taking a seat beside him. "What are you writing about?" "Just my kids," he admitted, his heart swelling with the weight of his emotions. "I miss them terribly." Helen nodded, her expression empathetic. "Families can be complicated. I haven't seen my son in years. Sometimes I wonder if he even thinks of me." Arthur's heart ached for her. "It's hard, isn't it? The silence can be deafening." "It can be," she agreed softly. "But maybe it's not too late for reconnection. Writing can be a good start. Have you thought about keeping a journal?" He looked at her, the idea sparking something within him. "I suppose I never considered it seriously before. But maybe you're right." "Why not give it a try? You have so many stories to tell," she encouraged, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "And who knows? Maybe it will help you find the words to reach out to your children." Arthur felt a flicker of hope ignite inside him. "I think I will," he said, a newfound determination in his voice. "Thank you, Helen. You always know what to say." "Just doing my part," she replied with a warm smile. They shared a moment of silence, a bond forming between them, both seeking solace in shared experiences. As the rain continued to patter against the window, Arthur returned to his writing, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Each word he penned felt like a bridge, a pathway back to the love he had almost lost. The memories flowed freely now, each sentence a step toward healing, toward the possibility of reconnection with his children. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope shimmering in the distance. Caroline sat hunched over her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her tired face. The autumn sun filtered through the window, casting a warm light on the scattered papers and coffee mugs that surrounded her. She sighed heavily, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, but her mind was elsewhere. The ringing of her phone startled her, and she snatched it up, half expecting it to be a work-related call. "Hey Caroline, it's Mark. Can we talk?" Mark's voice, her colleague from work, came through with an urgency that piqued her interest. Sure. What's up?" Caroline replied, trying to keep her tone neutral, even though she was bracing herself for yet another discussion about the upcoming project deadline. "I wanted to check in on you," Mark continued, concern lacing his words. "You've been working yourself to the bone lately. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mark. Just busy, you know. Trying to juggle work and family," Caroline said, forcing a smile that he couldn't see. "Family, huh?" Mark's voice softened, and Caroline could hear the sympathy in his tone. "I know how hard it can be, but you need to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Caroline leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. "I appreciate it, but I've got a lot on my plate right now. My dad's health isn't great, and I'm trying to keep everything together." "Maybe it's time to consider what you really want, Caroline," Mark suggested gently. "Are you doing this for them, or for yourself?" His words struck a chord, and for a moment, Caroline remained silent, contemplating the weight of his question. She thought of her father, Arthur, and the way he had been treated like a burden, locked away in the nursing home. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just feel so lost." "Just remember, it's okay to ask for help," Mark said before ending the call, leaving Caroline with her swirling thoughts. Meanwhile, Jason sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the remnants of a long night visible in the scattered bottles on the coffee table. The television flickered, casting shadows across the room, but he was too lost in his own mind to pay attention to the noise. He picked up a frame from the clutter, a photo of him and Arthur from years ago, their faces lit up with joy as they rode bicycles through the park. God, what happened to us? He muttered to himself, his voice thick with regret. He remembered the laughter, the lessons Arthur had taught them, and the way his father had always been there, supporting their dreams. But now, he felt like a ghost in his own life, haunted by memories and trapped in a cycle of addiction. Jason tossed the frame back down, frustration boiling within him. I can't keep doing this, he whispered, gripping the edges of the sofa. He stared at the picture again, this time allowing the memories to wash over him. The warmth of Arthur's embrace, the sound of his laughter, and the pride in his eyes whenever Jason showed him a new painting. Suddenly his phone buzzed, cutting through the haze of his thoughts. It was a message from Caroline. Dad's not doing well. I think we need to go see him. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I should have known, Jason sighed, his heart racing. He knew he couldn't ignore the message, not when it came to Arthur. He quickly replied, I'll be there. As he put the phone down, he felt a flicker of resolve surge within him. Maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. Later that afternoon, Caroline and Jason found themselves in the parking lot of the nursing home, the air thick with unspoken tension. They exchanged glances, each reading the other's uncertainty and fear. We can do this, Caroline said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. Yeah, but what do we even say? Jason replied, running his fingers through his hair. I mean, do we apologize? Do we act like everything's fine? Caroline took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside her. We just have to be honest. He deserves that much. As they stepped into the home, the familiar smell of antiseptic and the muted sounds of distant conversations enveloped them. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls themselves held the weight of all the stories that had been told within them. They found Arthur sitting in a common area, an elderly woman beside him sharing a laugh. Caroline's heart sank at the sight. He looked so frail, his skin paper-thin, yet his eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but before she could overthink, Jason placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Hey, Dad, Caroline called softly as they walked over, her voice trembling. Arthur turned, his expression shifting from surprise to joy as he recognized them. Caroline! Jason! What a lovely surprise! His voice was warm, but Caroline could sense the underlying weariness. Hey, Dad! Jason managed, forcing a smile despite the lump in his throat. Arthur gestured for them to sit down, the old woman beside him excusing herself to give them privacy. What brings you two here? He asked, his eyes searching theirs for answers. We got your call, Caroline said, her heart racing at the vulnerability of the moment. I'm glad you came, Arthur replied, his smile fading slightly. I've missed you both. It's been too long. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken guilt. Caroline felt tears prick at her eyes, and the weight of her regrets crashed down upon her. I'm sorry, Dad. I've been so caught up in everything, in trying to keep my life together, that I forgot about you. Me too, Jason added, his voice low. I've been distracted. I should have been here more. Arthur reached out, his hand trembling as it rested on Caroline's. You don't need to apologize. I know life gets busy. I just want you both to be happy. But we're not, Caroline admitted, a shuddering breath escaping her lips. We're not happy, and I don't know how to fix it. Arthur's gaze softened, and for a moment, it felt like the years of silence and hurt began to dissolve. You fix it by being honest with yourselves and with each other. You're stronger together than apart. As they sat together, the conversation flowed, the walls of resentment and misunderstanding starting to crumble under the warmth of shared memories. Arthur spoke of the days when he would take them to the park, teaching them to ride their bikes, and how proud he felt watching them grow. Each story pulled at their hearts, reminding them of the love that had once bound them tightly together. But as the visit progressed, Jason's gaze shifted to the corner of the room, where he spotted the old woman, Helen, laughing with another resident. Something about her laughter stirred something deep within him, a longing for connection that he had been missing. He glanced back at Arthur, who was still sharing stories, but Jason felt an internal conflict brewing. Dad, can I ask you something? Jason ventured, his voice hesitant. Of course, son. Anything, Arthur replied, his eyes gleaming with encouragement. Jason hesitated, battling the emotions churning inside him. What if we've all been so caught up in our own lives that we forgot about what really matters? What if we've lost sight of each other? Arthur's expression turned serious, and he nodded slowly. That's the danger of life, isn't it? We get so wrapped up in our struggles that we forget to reach out and connect, but it's never too late to try again. As Jason absorbed his father's words, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Maybe this was the moment he needed to face himself, to seek help and reconnect with the family he had distanced himself from for so long. He glanced at Caroline, who was now wiping away tears, and he knew they were both feeling the same urge to change. In that moment, as they sat together in the nursing home, the three of them formed a fragile bridge over years of silence, ready to step into the unknown, guided by the flickering flame of hope and the promise of reconciliation. Arthur Pennington sat in the sunlit corner of the common room at the nursing home, glancing out the window as the autumn leaves danced in the crisp breeze. The vibrant reds and yellows contrasted sharply with the grayness of the sky, a reminder of the vibrancy of life that once surrounded him. He had spent the better part of his days here in solitude, with his memories as his only companions. It wasn't the life he had envisioned for himself, especially at this stage, but it was the reality he faced. As he watched, a shadow crossed his path. It was Helen, a fellow resident whose gentle smile had become a beacon of comfort for him. She had a way of lighting up the room, even on the dreariest of days. Today, she approached him with a book in hand, her silver hair gleaming in the soft light. "Arthur," she said, her voice warm and inviting, "I found this poetry book in the library. Would you like to read a few with me?" He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "I'd love to, Helen. Poetry has a way of capturing emotions that sometimes we can't express ourselves." They settled into the worn, comfortable chairs, the book resting between them. Helen flipped through the pages until she found a poem that resonated with her. She cleared her throat softly and began to read, her voice flowing like a gentle stream. Arthur listened, his heart swelling with nostalgia as she recited verses about love, loss, and the passage of time. Themes that echoed the chambers of his own heart. "Life is but a fleeting moment, like the leaves that fall in autumn," she read aloud, pausing to glance at Arthur. "Isn't that beautiful?" "It's profoundly true," Arthur replied, his voice gravelly with age. "We often take for granted the moments we have, don't we? I wish I'd written down more of my thoughts when I had the chance." Helen placed the book down, her eyes twinkling with an idea. "Why don't you start writing now? You have so many stories inside you, Arthur. Perhaps a journal could help you express those memories and feelings." Arthur considered this. He had always enjoyed writing, but life had swept him away in its relentless current, leaving little time for reflection. "You think so? I've never thought of it that way." "I do," Helen encouraged, leaning closer. "Writing can be therapeutic. It's a way to connect with your past, and who knows, maybe you'll find a way to share your wisdom with others." Her words struck a chord within him. Perhaps it was time to confront the memories that had shaped his life, to give them a voice. Arthur nodded slowly, a small smile creeping onto his face. "You might be right, Helen. I'll give it a try." Days passed, and Arthur ventured into the world of writing. He found a quiet nook in the library, surrounded by the scent of old books and the whispers of history. He started with simple entries, recollecting moments from his childhood, the laughter of his children, and the love he had for his late wife, Margaret. Each word flowed from his heart, weaving a tapestry of his life that he had long kept hidden. One afternoon, as he was deep in thought, the door creaked open, and Helen entered, holding a cup of steaming tea. "I thought you might like a little pick-me-up," she said, her smile brightening the room. "Thank you, Helen," Arthur replied, taking the cup gratefully. "I've been writing about my kids today. It brings back such vivid memories." "Tell me about them," she urged, settling into the chair across from him. "What were they like as children?" Arthur chuckled softly, his eyes glistening with warmth. "Oh, they were a handful, that's for sure. Caroline was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and trying to catch fireflies at night. Jason, however, was more of a dreamer, often lost in his drawings. I remember one summer, I took them both to the park, and we had a picnic." Helen leaned in, intrigued. "What happened at the picnic?" "We spent the day laughing, eating sandwiches, and I taught them how to ride their bikes," he recalled, his voice thick with emotion. "It was one of those perfect days where nothing else mattered. I can still hear their laughter echoing in my mind." "Those are precious memories," Helen said softly. "It's good to hold on to them, to reflect on the love you've shared." Arthur nodded, feeling the weight of nostalgia wrap around him like a warm blanket. "I wish they could see how much those moments meant to me now. I feel so distant from them, like a ghost haunting my own life." Helen reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "You're not a ghost, Arthur. You're a living testament to those memories, and it's never too late to reconnect with them. Her words ignited a spark of hope within him. Could he really bridge the gap that had grown between him and his children? He resolved to write letters to them, not just about material possessions, but about the love and lessons he wanted to pass on. "Maybe I will," he said, a newfound determination in his voice. "I'll write them letters, share my thoughts and feelings. Perhaps it could help mend some of the distance." Helen beamed at him. "That's a wonderful idea. You have so much wisdom to share, and they need to know how you feel." Inspired by her encouragement, Arthur dedicated himself to his writing. Each letter became a piece of his heart, filled with stories of joy, sorrow, and the lessons learned through a long life. He poured his soul onto the pages, hoping that his children would one day understand the depth of his love for them. Weeks turned into months, and Arthur found solace in his newfound passion for writing. The act of putting pen to paper became a form of therapy, allowing him to explore emotions he had buried for too long. He reveled in the simplicity of words, the way they could capture fleeting moments and transform them into something eternal. One day, as he was writing, Helen entered the room, her presence immediately brightening the atmosphere. "You seem deep in thought, Arthur," she remarked, noticing the look of concentration on his face. "I am," he replied, glancing up with a smile. "I just finished a letter to Carolyn. I want her to know how much I value our time together, even when it feels lost." "That's beautiful," she said, taking a seat beside him. "Would you like to share?" Arthur hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, feeling vulnerable yet safe with Helen. He took a deep breath and began to read aloud. "Dear Caroline, as I sit down to write this, I am reminded of the moments we shared, the laughter that filled our home, and the love that has always bound us together. I regret the distance that has grown between us, and I want you to know how much you mean to me." As he continued, Helen listened intently, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The emotions in his words resonated with her own experiences of love and loss. When he finished, a heavy silence enveloped the room, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. "That was incredible, Arthur," Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have a gift for expressing what so many of us feel but cannot articulate." "Thank you, Helen," he replied, feeling a warmth in his chest. "It's cathartic to share these feelings. I just hope my children will understand." "They will," she assured him. "You've taken the first step toward healing. Writing can be powerful. It can bridge the gaps that life has created." Arthur nodded, feeling a sense of peace settling within him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was reclaiming his story, one word at a time. With Helen's encouragement, he was ready to face the future, hopeful that his words could spark the reconnection he longed for with Caroline and Jason. As the leaves continued to fall outside, Arthur felt a sense of renewal. He was not just an old man in a nursing home. He was a storyteller, a father, and a man filled with love and wisdom. And with each letter he wrote, he was creating a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. Arthur sat quietly in his room at the nursing home, the shadows of autumn creeping through the window as the leaves outside danced in the chilly breeze. It had been weeks since he had last seen Carolyn, his daughter, and a heavy weight settled in his chest. He could feel the passage of time like a slow-moving river, carrying with it the remnants of his past and the fragments of his family that had drifted apart. The door creaked open, and Caroline stepped in, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Arthur looked up, his heart quickening. She was wearing a tailored jacket, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, but her eyes betrayed a weariness that made him ache with concern. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Caroline," Arthur replied, his voice raspy with age. "It's good to see you." She settled into the chair across from him, her posture rigid, as if the weight of her own expectations pressed down on her shoulders. Arthur could sense the tension in the air, thick and palpable. He tried to bridge the distance between them, to reach out, but the words stuck in his throat like stones. "How have you been?" Caroline asked, her gaze darting around the room, avoiding his. "I'm fine, just fine," he replied, forcing a smile. "The food is edible." He chuckled lightly, hoping to lighten the mood, but Caroline's lips barely twitched. "Good to hear," she said absent-mindedly, her mind clearly elsewhere. "I've been busy with work, you know how it is." Arthur nodded, feeling the chasm between them grow wider. I thought maybe we could talk. There's something I'd like to share with you. Caroline sighed, leaning back in her chair. I don't know if now is the right time, Dad. I have a lot on my plate. I understand, Arthur said gently, his heart aching at her words. But I feel like we're losing touch. I miss you, Caroline. Her expression softened for a brief moment, but it quickly hardened again. I miss you too, but I can't just drop everything. My life is complicated right now. Complicated? Arthur echoed, frustration bubbling beneath his calm facade. Is that really all it is? You know I don't want to be a burden. I want to connect. I don't know how to do that, she admitted, her voice cracking. You don't understand what I'm going through, Dad. I'm trying to keep my life together, and sometimes it feels like I'm failing. Arthur's heart sank. Caroline, I'm not here to blame you. I just want you to know that I love you. No matter what happens, you will always be my daughter. She looked away, blinking rapidly as if holding back tears. It's just hard, okay? I feel so guilty. I should have been there for you, and now I'm here, and it feels too late. It's never too late, Arthur said, his voice soft but firm. We can start over. You can talk to me. Just let me in. Caroline finally met his gaze, and for a moment, the walls she had built around her heart began to crack. I just don't know how, she confessed, her eyes glistening. Before Arthur could respond, the door swung open again, and Jason, his son, stepped into the room. He looked disheveled and weary, as if he had just rolled out of bed. The tension in the room thickened as both children stood before him, each grappling with their own burdens. Hey, Dad, Jason said, his voice low. He glanced at Caroline, and a flicker of recognition of shared sorrow and unspoken words passed between them. Arthur noticed the way Jason shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. I got your call, he added, his tone flat. Is everything okay? Of course, Arthur said, forcing a smile despite the heaviness in his heart. I'm just having a conversation with your sister. Right, Jason replied, his eyes flitting to Caroline, who was now looking at him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Maybe you should join us, Arthur suggested, hoping to create a space for healing. There's something I want to share with both of you. Jason hesitated, then nodded, pulling up a chair beside Caroline. The three of them sat together in the small, sterile room, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. Dad, Jason began, but Arthur raised a hand to stop him. Please let me go first, Arthur said, the urgency of his feelings pressing against his ribs. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, especially about family. About us. Caroline looked at Jason, who wore a troubled expression. What do you mean? She asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and anxiety. I want you both to know how much you mean to me, Arthur said, his voice breaking slightly, and how sorry I am for the distance that has grown between us. I've felt it too, and I want to fix it. Fix it? Caroline scoffed, her walls re-erecting themselves. It's not that simple. I know it's not, Arthur replied, his tone steady. But it's worth trying. I'm still here. I want to share my stories, my memories, everything I can before it's too late. Jason shifted in his seat, the weight of his father's words settling heavily on his shoulders. I don't want to be here, sitting in this room, pretending everything is fine, he said, his voice rising. I've messed up and I don't know how to fix myself, let alone our family. Neither do I, Caroline admitted, her voice small. But I want to try. Arthur felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. That's all I'm asking for, he said, his heart swelling with love for his children. Let's take this one step at a time. We can talk, we can laugh, we can cry together. I want to hear about your lives, your struggles. I want to share mine. Jason looked down, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. It's just hard to talk about everything. None of us is perfect. No one is, Arthur replied gently. But we are family. And family supports one another, no matter what. Caroline wiped away a stray tear, her voice trembling as she spoke. I've been so focused on my own life that I forgot about yours, Dad. I'm sorry. I want to change that. Me too, Jason added, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to try, Dad. I really do. Arthur felt a wave of warmth wash over him. Then let's start right now. Tell me about your day, Caroline. What's been weighing on your heart? As Caroline began to share her struggles at work, the walls that had separated them began to crumble, allowing the light of understanding and connection to seep through. Arthur listened intently, his heart full of gratitude for this moment, the moment they were all together, vulnerable and open. The path to healing wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, hope flickered like a candle in the darkness. And as Arthur looked at his children, he knew that they were finally beginning to find their way back to each other. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting an amber glow through the windows of the nursing home, Caroline found herself standing in front of an old wooden chest in the attic of her childhood home. Dust motes danced in the air as she opened the lid, revealing a treasure trove of memories. Among the fading photographs and worn-out toys, she stumbled upon an album filled with snapshots of family gatherings, birthday parties, and vacations by the lake. The sight of her father, Arthur, smiling broadly as he held her and Jason on his lap, sent a wave of nostalgia crashing over her. Sitting on the attic floor, she flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the outlines of their faces. "Look at us, Jason. We were so happy," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper, echoing in the silence of the attic. As she turned a page, she paused at a picture of her father teaching them how to ride bikes. The joy in their eyes mirrored the warmth of the day. "I remember that day so clearly," Caroline said, her heart aching. "He was so patient with us. I was so afraid. But he kept encouraging me." Tears streamed down her face as the memories flooded back. Arthur running alongside her, holding the back of her bike until she found her balance. "I wish I had appreciated him more," she murmured, wiping her eyes. Meanwhile, in a small coffee shop nearby, Jason sat alone, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. The walls were adorned with vibrant local art, but his gaze remained fixed on the table. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through old pictures of family outings, each image a reminder of better times. He paused at a photo of Arthur, looking proud as Jason held up his first fish. "What happened to us, Dad?" he whispered to himself, feeling a mixture of guilt and longing. He glanced around the cafe, noticing families laughing and connecting over steaming mugs. "I used to have that," he said quietly, a bitter taste rising in his throat. "What am I doing with my life?" Suddenly the phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Caroline. "Hey, it's me," she said, her voice shaky. "I found something. Something that made me think of Dad." "What is it?" he asked, intrigued despite himself. "I found our old family album. There are so many pictures of us together, Jason. It made me realize how much I miss him. I think we need to see him again." Jason hesitated. Memories of the last visit flooding. Back the awkward silence, the unspoken words. "Do you really think we can just walk in there after everything?" "We have to try. He needs us, and honestly, we need him too," Caroline replied, her voice firm yet pleading. Jason sighed, knowing she was right. "All right, I'll come by your place, and we'll go together." As they prepared for their visit, Arthur sat in the common room of the nursing home, a gentle smile gracing his weathered face as he chatted with Helen. They had formed a bond that transcended their shared loneliness, each conversation a step towards healing. "Do you remember the first time you fell in love?" Helen asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Arthur chuckled, tilting his head back. "Oh, I do. Her name was Margaret. We met in high school. I was so nervous I nearly dropped my lunch tray when I asked her to dance." Helen laughed, the sound light and infectious. "What happened?" "I tripped over my own feet and ended up on the floor," Arthur replied, feigning embarrassment. "But she laughed, and it broke the ice. We danced anyway." Their laughter filled the room, a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere that often lingered in the nursing home. Arthur's heart swelled with gratitude for the connection he had found in Helen, a friendship that reminded him he was still alive, despite the shadows of his past. Later that evening, as the residents gathered for an arts and crafts session, Helen suggested they create something meaningful. "How about we make a mural together?" she proposed, her enthusiasm infectious. Arthur's eyes lit up at the idea. "What if we each paint a memory? Something that represents who we are?" The group nodded in agreement, and soon, colors filled the canvas as each resident contributed their stories. Moments of joy, love, and loss. Arthur felt invigorated as he painted, reflecting on his life and the lessons he had learned. Across town, Caroline and Jason arrived at the nursing home, their hearts pounding, in anticipation. "You ready?" Caroline asked, her voice steadying. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jason replied, his nerves palpable. As they entered the common room, they spotted Arthur and Helen deep in conversation, laughter spilling from their lips. A pang of jealousy twisted in Jason's chest, but he quickly pushed it aside. "Let's go," he said, and they approached their father. "Dad," Caroline called softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Arthur turned, his expression shifting from surprise to joy. "Carolyn? Jason!" He rose slowly, his frail frame betraying the excitement in his voice. What a wonderful surprise. "Can we sit?" Caroline asked, her heart racing. "Of course, I'd love that," he said, patting the empty seat beside him. As they settled down, Jason felt the tension in the air. "Hey, Dad," he began, his voice low. "We wanted to talk about everything." Arthur's smile faded slightly, understanding the weight of their words. "I know things have been complicated," he replied cautiously, "but I'm here, and I want to listen." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Caroline broke the silence. "I found an old family album today," she said, her voice trembling. "It made me realize how much I miss our family. I miss you, Dad." Arthur's face softened, a glimmer of hope igniting in his chest. "I miss you too, sweetheart. I've been waiting for this moment." Just then, Helen approached, holding a small stack of papers. "I overheard your conversation, and I think you all could use this," she said, handing the papers to Arthur. "What is it?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "They're poems I've written about my life," Helen explained, her voice gentle. "I thought sharing them might help you express your feelings." Arthur beamed at her, touched by her generosity. "Thank you, Helen. This is beautiful." As they read through the poems together, a sense of connection enveloped them. Caroline and Jason felt the weight of their past begin to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and possibility. In that moment, Arthur felt a surge of inspiration. "You know, I've been thinking about writing too," he admitted, glancing at Helen. "I want to share my memories with you. I want to create something lasting." Caroline and Jason exchanged glances, their hearts swelling with pride. "We'd love that, Dad," Jason said, his voice steady. "Let's do it together," Caroline added, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. As the conversation flowed, Arthur felt a warmth spread through his chest. He realized that despite the years of distance and hurt, the bond of family could still be mended. And as they shared stories and laughter, he knew they were on the path to healing, one memory at a time. Caroline sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating the chaos of paperwork that surrounded her. The soft hum of the office air conditioner was barely audible over the cacophony of ringing phones and conversations swirling around her. She felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. As she absent-mindedly scrolled through emails, a flash of guilt hit her, cutting through her focus. Her mind drifted back to the last time she visited her father at the nursing home. The memory of their strained conversation replayed in her mind, the words left unspoken, hanging between them like a thick fog. "Why can't I just say it?" she muttered under her breath, her fingers tapping against the desk in frustration. Her colleague Sandra paused beside her cubicle, a knowing look on her face. "Still thinking about your dad?" Sandra asked sympathetically, leaning against the partition. Caroline sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Yeah. I don't know. It's so complicated. I want to be there for him, but it's like every time I try, I just end up pushing him away." "Have you thought about reaching out again?" Sandra suggested gently. "Sometimes a simple apology can go a long way." Caroline nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. What if it's too late? What if he doesn't want to hear it? The fear of rejection gnawed at her, but the thought of her father alone and vulnerable in that nursing home was even more distressing. As the day dragged on, Caroline's resolve began to solidify. She decided that she would visit Arthur again, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. It was time to confront the past and embrace the possibility of forgiveness. That evening, with the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, she pulled out her phone and dialed the nursing home. "Good evening, Willow Creek Nursing Home. How can I help you?" The receptionist answered cheerfully. "Hi, this is Caroline Pennington. I'd like to schedule a visit with my father, Arthur," she said, her heart racing. "Of course, Miss Pennington. When would you like to come in?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible." "Absolutely. We'll see you then." After hanging up, Caroline felt a mix of excitement and dread. She spent the night tossing and turning, replaying conversations in her mind, crafting what she hoped would be the perfect apology. But deep down, she knew that nothing she said could erase the years of distance between them. Meanwhile, Jason sat in his small, cluttered living room, the remnants of his last binge scattered across the table. Empty bottles and crumpled takeout containers surrounded him, a testament to his own struggles. He stared blankly at a photograph of his father, taken years ago during a family picnic. Arthur was laughing, a wide smile on his face, with Jason and Caroline riding their bicycles in the background. The image tugged at something deep within him, a yearning for the connection they once had. "Damn it," Jason whispered, rubbing his eyes. "What have I become?" He picked up the photo, tracing his father's image with his fingertips. The memories flooded back: his dad teaching him to ride a bike, the warmth of his encouragement, the way he made everything seem possible. Jason felt a swell of shame as he thought of how he had distanced himself from Arthur in recent years, drowning his pain in alcohol and self-pity. Suddenly his phone buzzed, snapping him back to reality. It was a text from Caroline. "I'm visiting Dad tomorrow. I hope you'll join me." A mix of emotions washed over him: guilt, anger, but mostly a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the moment he needed to confront his demons. He took a deep breath, considering the implications of her message. "I can't keep running," he murmured to himself, standing up and pacing around the room. He glanced at the scattered bottles, remnants of his escapism, and made a decision. He would go to the nursing home. For Arthur. For himself. The next morning, Caroline arrived at Willow Creek Nursing Home, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was cool, the sky overcast, matching her somber mood. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of antiseptic and the faint sound of muted conversations greeting her. As she walked down the corridor, she could hear the laughter of residents mingling with the distant sound of a piano. When she reached her father's room, she paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. What if he didn't want to see her? What if he was angry? Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Arthur was sitting in a chair by the window, sunlight filtering through the glass, illuminating the silver strands in his hair. "Dad?" Caroline's voice quivered as she stepped inside. Arthur turned, his expression shifting from surprise to a mixture of warmth and wariness. "Caroline," he said softly, a hint of a smile breaking through his initial shock. "I didn't expect to see you." "I know," she replied, her throat tightening. I wanted to talk." Arthur studied her for a moment, his gaze searching. "Come sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "I'd like that." As Caroline took a seat, she felt the tension in the air thickening. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything," she began, her voice wavering. "I'm sorry for how distant I've been. I guess I thought it would be easier to just avoid everything." She paused, searching for the right words. "I never meant to hurt you, Dad." Arthur's expression softened. "I know, Caroline. I felt it too. It's been hard for both of us." He took a deep breath, his eyes glistening. "I just wanted you to know that I've missed you. I've missed my little girl." Tears welled in Caroline's eyes as she fought to hold them back. "I've missed you too. I didn't realize how much until now. I just didn't know how to fix things." "Sometimes it just takes a little courage to reach out," Arthur replied, his voice steady. "I've been waiting for you to do just that." Their conversation flowed more easily after that, as they shared stories and memories, each word mending the rifts that had formed between them. Caroline felt as though a weight had been lifted, and for the first time in a long while she felt hopeful. Meanwhile, Jason was on his way to the nursing home, fighting the urge to turn back. His stomach churned with anxiety, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a necessary step. As he pulled into the parking lot, he hesitated for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Come on, you can do this," he whispered to himself. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The familiar sights and sounds of the nursing home flooded his senses, and he felt a mix of nostalgia and dread. As he approached his father's room, he paused outside the door, hearing the soft murmur of voices within. "Dad?" he said hesitantly, knocking lightly on the door. "Come in," came Arthur's voice, warm and inviting. Jason opened the door slowly, his heart racing. The sight before him was unexpected. His sister and father were deep in conversation, laughter bubbling between them. For a moment, he felt a pang of jealousy, but it quickly faded as he saw the genuine joy on their faces. "Hey," he said awkwardly, stepping inside. "Jason!" Caroline exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "I'm so glad you're here." Arthur turned to his son, a smile spreading across his face. "Look who finally decided to join us." "Yeah, well, I figured it was time to face the music," Jason replied, trying to sound nonchalant despite the nerves churning in his stomach. He took a seat next to Caroline, feeling the tension still lingering in the air. "Your sister and I were just catching up," Arthur said, his tone light. "It's good to see you both together." Jason nodded, glancing between them. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all. We were just talking about how much we've missed each other," Caroline said, her voice sincere. "Yeah, I can see that," Jason replied, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his tone. "I've missed you too, Dad. I just didn't know how to say it." Arthur's expression softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on Jason's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for. Just know that I'm here for you. Always." As they sat together, a sense of warmth enveloped the room. The barriers that had kept them apart for so long began to crumble, replaced by a fragile hope for healing. In that moment, Caroline and Jason exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They may have been lost for a while, but they were willing to find their way back to each other, hand in hand, with their father guiding them. Arthur sat in the modest armchair by the window of his room in the nursing home, sunlight filtering through the cold glass, illuminating the pages of the journal he had begun to fill. Each line contained memories, lessons learned, and unspoken words, woven together in his delicate handwriting. He felt a sense of purpose in this simple act of writing, a way to leave a part of himself behind, to connect with his children despite the distance that had grown between them. As he turned another page, lost in thoughts of the past, a gentle knock on the door interrupted him. He looked up, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "Come in," he called out, his voice a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The door creaked open, and Caroline stepped inside, her expression a blend of nervousness and determination. She hesitated, taking in the sight of her father. His frail frame, the silver hair that framed his face, the deep lines that told stories of a life well lived. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, her voice quivering slightly. "Caroline," he replied, a smile breaking through the shadows of his face. "It's good to see you. How have you been?" "Busy," she admitted, crossing her arms as if to shield herself from the vulnerability of the moment. "Work has been overwhelming and—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I've been thinking about you a lot." Arthur nodded, sensing the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. He patted the seat beside him. "Sit down, sweetheart. We have time to talk." She took a deep breath and settled into the chair, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding his gaze. "I've been meaning to come and see you, but there's always something getting in the way." Her voice faltered. "I'm sorry for that. Life can be complicated," he replied gently, "but I've missed you. I've missed both of you." There was a pause, filled with the echoes of past grievances and hurt feelings. "I know things haven't been easy between us." Caroline finally met his gaze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I think I've been afraid to face you," she confessed. "Afraid of what I might say or how you might react. There's so much I regret." Arthur's heart ached at her admission. "We've all made mistakes, Caroline. I wish I could have been a better father, a better support for you both. But we still have time to mend things, don't we?" "I want to," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know where to start." He reached for her hand, his grip gentle yet firm. "Start with honesty. Speak your heart." He paused, searching for the right words. "What do you feel?" Caroline hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I feel like I've let you down. I've focused so much on my career that I've neglected my family. I thought you'd be better off without me, that I was a burden." Arthur shook his head. "No, my dear, you were never a burden. I wanted you to pursue your dreams, but I also wanted to be a part of your life. I miss those moments, your laughter, your triumphs, your struggles." Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she squeezed his hand. "I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was just running away. I didn't want to face how much I was hurting you. I should have been here." "It's never too late to come back," he reassured her. "Just like the leaves falling outside, life goes through seasons. Sometimes it's time to let go, and other vezes, it's time to reconnect." Caroline nodded, wiping her tears. "I wish I could turn back time. There are so many things I'd change." "Don't dwell on what you can't change," he said softly. "Focus on what you can do now. Let's start fresh." The door creaked open again, and Jason stepped in, his face a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Hey, Dad." "Caroline," he greeted, his voice low. He looked at Arthur, and for a moment they just stood there, measuring the distance between them. "Jason," Arthur said, his tone inviting. "Come in. We were just having a heart-to-heart." "Yeah, I heard." Jason shifted his weight, glancing at his sister, then back at Arthur. "I wanted to come by too. I know I haven't been around, just been dealing with some stuff." Arthur could see the pain etched on his son's face, the struggle hidden beneath the surface. "Come sit with us," he invited, patting the space next to Caroline. Jason hesitated but eventually approached, taking a seat on the edge, as if afraid to fully commit to the moment. "I've been thinking about you, Dad," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "About what we've lost. And what we can still regain," Arthur added, his gaze steady. "I want us to find a way back to each other. Caroline looked at Jason, her heart racing. We've both made choices that have hurt Dad, but we can't keep running away from it. Yeah, Jason said, looking down at his hands. I've been lost for a while now. I thought pushing everyone away would make it easier, but I realize now it just made everything worse. Arthur's heart swelled with a mix of pride and sorrow. It's okay to feel lost, son. Life can be overwhelming, but you're not alone. I'm here. We're here. Jason finally raised his gaze, meeting Arthur's eyes. I want to be better, Dad. I want to make things right. I just don't know how. Caroline leaned closer to her brother, her voice softening. We take it one step at a time. We talk. We listen. We forgive. Arthur nodded, feeling the warmth of their presence, the hope blossoming amidst the cracks of their fractured relationship. It starts with honesty, just like Caroline said. Share your feelings, your fears. It's okay to be vulnerable with each other. Yeah, Jason replied, his expression shifting as he absorbed their father's words. I've been hiding from my problems, thinking I could handle it on my own. But I see now that I need you both. Caroline smiled through her tears, the tension in the room slowly dissipating. We're stronger together. We can face anything if we work as a family. Arthur watched them, feeling a flicker of joy. I've always believed in the strength of family, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You both mean the world to me. Let's make a promise today to communicate, to support one another, and to never let distance come between us again. Jason nodded, determination filling his features. I promise, Dad. Caroline wiped her eyes, her heart lightening. Me too. We'll figure this out together. The room was filled with a sense of renewal, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. Arthur felt the weight of his years lift just a little, as if the sun outside had broken through the clouds, casting a warm glow on their hearts. They may have stumbled along the way, but now, for the first time in a long while, it felt like they were finally on the path to healing. Arthur sat in his chair by the window, the soft afternoon light filtering through the sheer curtains, casting delicate patterns on the floor. He cradled a worn, leather-bound notebook in his hands, the pages filled with his carefully penned thoughts and memories. Today felt different. A sense of anticipation thrummed through him. He could feel the weight of the letters he had written for his children, tucked safely away in the top drawer of his nightstand. These letters were not just a testament of his love. They were bridges he hoped would reconnect him with Caroline and Jason, who had drifted so far away. When Caroline arrived, Arthur's heart raced. He laid the notebook on his lap as he heard the soft tap of her shoes against the cold tile floor. The air between them had often been thick with unspoken words. But today, he hoped for clarity. Caroline stepped into the room, her expression cautious yet curious. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice wavering slightly. I brought you some cookies. She held up a small tin, the smell of chocolate wafting into the air. Thank you, sweetheart, Arthur replied, a warm smile creeping onto his face. You know, I think I could use a little sweetness in my life. As she set the tin down on the small table beside him, Arthur noticed her eyes flicker to the notebook on his lap. What's that? She asked, a hint of apprehension in her tone. It's something I've been working on, he said, gesturing to the pages. A little diary of sorts. I thought it might help me make sense of things. Things? She echoed, her brows knitting together in confusion. Life, love, regrets, he said softly, his gaze drifting out the window, where the leaves danced in the gentle breeze. And you two. Caroline shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms as if trying to shield herself from the vulnerability that hung in the air. You don't have to worry about us, Dad. We're managing. Managing isn't living, Caroline, he replied, turning to meet her gaze. I want you to know how much you and Jason mean to me. That's what these letters are about. At that moment, Jason entered the room, his presence a whirlwind of energy. Hey, Dad. Sorry I'm late, he said, his voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. He caught sight of Caroline and Arthur, the tension palpable, and immediately sensed the weight of the moment. What's going on? Your sister and I were just catching up, Arthur said, trying to keep the mood light. I was telling her about my diary. Your diary? Jason scoffed lightly, trying to inject humor into the situation. I didn't know you were the sentimental type, old man. Arthur chuckled, but the laughter quickly faded as he looked at his children. It's not just a diary, Jason. It's a way for me to share what I've learned through life. I've written letters for both of you. I want you to read them. The atmosphere shifted. the air heavy with unspoken words. "Letters?" Caroline repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? I've written about my memories, my dreams for you both, and things I wish I had said when I had the chance," he explained, his voice steady but his heart racing. "I want you to understand that, despite everything, my love for you has never wavered." "What's in them?" Jason asked, his brow furrowing. He was curious and cautious all at once, a tumult of emotions swirling within him. "Personal things," Arthur replied, taking a deep breath as he prepared to share his heart. "But mostly, I want you to know that I believe in you both. You have the power to shape your own futures, and I want to help you see that." "I don't know if I want to read them," Caroline said, her voice trembling. "What if they just remind me of everything we've lost?" "They're not just about loss," Arthur said, his voice firm yet gentle. "They're about hope, redemption, and the possibility of starting anew. I've made mistakes, but I've also learned. I want to share those lessons with you." As he spoke, Arthur could see the walls around Caroline begin to crack. She glanced at Jason, who was also visibly affected, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension etched on his face. "Okay," Caroline finally said, her resolve softening. "I'll read them. But only if you promise to read them with us." "Of course," Arthur agreed, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I wouldn't have it any other way." With a nod, Jason stepped closer, his fingers brushing against the handle of the drawer where Arthur had kept the letters safe. "Should we do it now?" he asked, his voice steadying. Arthur nodded, his pulse quickening. "Let's make this a moment to remember." As Jason opened the drawer, the letters were revealed, each one meticulously folded and addressed with love. He lifted the first envelope, his name scrawled across it in Arthur's familiar handwriting, and handed it to Caroline. "You go first," he said, stepping back to give her space. Caroline took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she opened the envelope. The paper crinkled softly and she unfolded it carefully. As she began to read, her lips moved silently, her eyes scanning the words that had been penned with such care. Arthur watched her closely, a mix of hope and trepidation coursing through him. After a few moments, Caroline's breath caught in her throat, and she looked up at Arthur, tears glistening in her eyes. "Dad, you really meant all of this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Arthur nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Every word." I didn't know you felt this way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so caught up in my own life that I forgot how much you've always been there for us." Jason, watching the exchange, felt a wave of emotion wash over him too. "Can I read mine now?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt inside. Arthur handed him the next letter, his heart racing as Jason opened it. He began to read aloud, his voice trembling slightly as he stumbled over some of the words. Arthur listened intently, his heart swelling with both pride and remorse as Jason revealed the struggles he had faced, the shadows that had loomed over him, and the love he had always felt from Arthur, even when he had pushed it away. As Jason finished reading, a silence enveloped the room. The three of them sat together, the weight of the past slowly lifting as they began to reconnect through the words written on those pages. "Dad, I didn't know how much you believed in me," Jason said, his voice cracking. I thought I was a disappointment." "You were never a disappointment," Arthur said firmly, his eyes locked onto Jason's. "You were always my grandson, my son. You just needed to find your way. And I'm here to help you with that." The moment hung in the air, filled with a newfound understanding and love. As they sat together, Helen watched from a distance, her heart swelling with emotion. She felt a part of their reunion, even from afar, her own memories flooding back. She had once had a family like this, and though her children were not there, the spirit of connection lingered in the air, reminding her of the love she had shared. "Thank you for sharing this with us, Dad," Caroline said, her voice trembling but filled with resolve. "I'm ready to move forward, to heal." Arthur nodded, a smile breaking through the weight of years of silence. "We'll do it together. I'm not done writing, and I'm not done loving you both." In that moment, the walls that had once separated them began to crumble, replaced by the promise of a future filled with love and understanding. As they shared laughter and tears, the past began to transform into a tapestry of hope, binding them together once more. As soft golden light of the afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of the activity room at the nursing home, casting a warm glow on the gathered family. Arthur sat in his favorite chair, a well-worn recliner that seemed to cradle him like an old friend. He glanced around the room, his heart swelling with a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. Today was the day he would share the letters he had written. Letters that held not only his wishes, but the essence of his love for Caroline and Jason. As the family settled into the chairs facing him, he could see the curiosity etched on their faces. Caroline sat with her arms crossed, a slight frown creasing her brow, while Jason fidgeted nervously in his seat, glancing at the floor. Helen, seated nearby, offered him an encouraging smile, her presence a comforting reminder that he was not alone in this moment. "Thank you both for coming," Arthur began, his voice steady but soft. "I know things have been complicated between us." He paused, searching their eyes for understanding. "Today, I want to share something important with you." Caroline leaned forward, her expression softening. "We're here, Dad. We want to listen." Jason nodded, his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. "Yeah, Dad. We're ready." Arthur reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a stack of handwritten letters, yellowed with age but still legible. "These are for each of you," he said, holding them up. "Each letter contains my thoughts, my memories, and some surprises." Caroline's eyes widened in curiosity. "Surprises? Let's start with you, Caroline," he said, handing her the first letter. "I hope you find it as meaningful as I intended." She took the letter, her hands trembling slightly. As she opened it, the faint scent of the lavender sachet he had tucked inside wafted into the air. The familiar aroma reminded her of her childhood, of days spent in the garden with him, her heart aching with a mix of love and regret. "My dearest Caroline," she began reading aloud, her voice soft and tentative. "As I sit down to write this, I'm reminded of the many afternoons we spent together, tending to our garden. You were always so passionate about making things grow, and it fills my heart with pride to see that same passion in you today." Arthur watched her closely, feeling a surge of emotion as the memories washed over him. He could see her beginning to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing as she absorbed his words. "I want you to know that I have always believed in your dreams," Caroline continued, her voice gaining strength. "When you were hesitant about starting your own business, I wanted you to know that I had set aside some money for you. I wanted you to chase your dreams without the burden of worry. You deserve happiness and fulfillment, my dear." Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears as she finished reading. "Dad, she stammered, overwhelmed by the depth of his love and understanding. "I didn't know you felt this way. I've been so lost." Jason, who had been listening intently, now leaned forward. "What do you mean, Dad? You saved money for Caroline's business?" Arthur nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "I always wanted to support my children. I just hoped you would find your way to what makes you happy." Caroline wiped her tears away, a mix of gratitude and sorrow flooding her heart. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was angry and scared. I should have come to you instead of shutting you out." Jason, feeling a surge of courage from his sister's confession, glanced down at the next letter in Arthur's hand. "What about me? Do I have one too?" Arthur chuckled softly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Of course, Jason. Here it is." He handed Jason the second letter, his heart racing as he anticipated his son's reaction. Jason took a deep breath and opened the letter, the faint smell of cedarwood filling the air. "My beloved Jason," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I know things have been rocky between us, and I can't express enough how proud I am of the man you've become, despite the challenges you've faced." Arthur could see the conflict in Jason's eyes, an amalgam of shame and hope. "I want you to understand that I see you, and I understand the pain you've been carrying." As Jason continued to read, Arthur could feel the weight of his son's struggles hanging in the air. "I made a donation in your name to a local art institution, hoping to give you the opportunity to explore your artistic talents. You've always had a gift for creativity, and I want you to follow that path. It's never too late to pursue what you love." Jason's breath hitched, and he looked up at his father, bewildered. You did that for me?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. "Of course," Arthur replied, his heart swelling with affection for his son. "I've always believed in your talent, Jason. I wanted to encourage you to find your way back to art, to the passion you once had." Jason's eyes filled with tears as he processed his father's words. "I've been so lost, Dad. I didn't realize you cared so much." The weight of his father's faith in him began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. Reading this, it makes me want to try again, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Dad." Arthur watched as Jason wiped away a tear, and he felt a sense of relief wash over him, knowing that he had reached both of his children in profound ways. "Now there's one more letter," Arthur said, looking at Helen, who had been quietly observing the exchange with a tender smile. "It's not just for you two. It's for all of us, really." He reached for the final letter, holding it gently in his hands. "This one is a bit different," he explained, his voice growing serious. "I want you both to understand how much I care, not just for you, but for those who have walked alongside me." As he opened the letter, Helen leaned closer, her heart racing as she sensed the significance of the moment. "To my dear family," he read aloud, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I have watched you both grow, and I have cherished every moment we shared. This journey we call life is woven with both joy and sorrow, and I want you to carry that lesson forward." Caroline and Jason listened intently, their hearts full of hope and love as they absorbed their father's wisdom. "Remember that family is not just about blood. It's about love, forgiveness, and understanding. I may not always have been the perfect father, but I have always tried to be the best I could be, and I hope with all my heart that you will find it in yourselves to forgive, to heal, and to come together as a family." The room fell silent as Arthur finished reading. He looked up, meeting the gaze of his children. There was a newfound understanding between them, a recognition of the journey they had all shared, despite the pain and distance. "I love you both," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what has happened, you are my greatest gifts. I hope these letters remind you of that." Caroline and Jason exchanged glances, the barriers that had separated them starting to crumble. "We love you too, Dad," Caroline said, her voice firm. "I'm sorry for everything." Jason nodded, his heart swelling as he felt a flicker of hope. "Me too, Dad. I'm so grateful for this chance." As they sat together, the weight of the past began to lift, leaving room for healing and connection. Helen, watching from a distance, felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She had hoped for moments like this where love could mend what was broken. The afternoon sun continued to shine through the window, illuminating the room with warmth, symbolizing the new beginnings that awaited them all. Arthur sat in the small, sunlit room of the nursing home, surrounded by the faint scent of autumn leaves drifting through the open window. The air was filled with a sense of finality, yet a warmth lingered as he prepared to share the most significant truth of his life. His heart raced with both fear and anticipation as he glanced at Caroline and Jason, who sat across from him, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. "There's something I need to tell you both," Arthur began, his voice trembling slightly against the silence that enveloped them. "Something I've kept from you for too long." Caroline's brow furrowed, the tension palpable in the air. "Dad, what is it? Is it about your health? We can handle anything, just tell us." Arthur cleared his throat, feeling the weight of years pressing down upon him. "It's not about my health, Caroline. It's about our family, about who we really are." He glanced at Jason, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes searching Arthur's face for answers. "What do you mean?" Jason asked, his voice low. "What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, summoning the courage to continue. "Jason, you and Caroline have always known me as your father. But the truth is, I am not your biological father. I'm your grandfather." The room seemed to freeze, and the words hung heavily in the air. Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What? That's not possible! You're my dad. You've always been my dad." "I know how this sounds, but let me explain," Arthur urged, feeling the weight of the moment suffocating him. "Your mother, your real father, he was my son, and he passed away before you were born. I took you in to raise you, to protect you from the world. I wanted to be there for you, both, to give you a life filled with love and care." Jason shook his head, disbelief etched across his features. "This can't be true. Mom never said anything. Your mother was trying to protect you. She wanted you to have a father figure, someone to look up to. I loved you both as if you were my own." And that's what mattered the most to me, Arthur explained, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted to give you a normal life, a happy life, but it seems that the truth has a way of creeping back in. Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears, and she struggled to comprehend the revelation. So, all this time, you've been keeping this secret? Why didn't you tell us before? We could have handled it together. I thought it was for the best, Arthur replied, his voice filled with regret. I thought that by keeping you close, by loving you as my own, it would spare you any pain. But I see now that the truth is far more important than my fears. Jason's fists clenched as he grappled with the news, the memories of his childhood flooding back with a new lens. So, what does that make me? Am I just a lie? Everything I believed about my family is wrong? No, Jason, it doesn't change the love we shared, Arthur insisted, his heart aching for the pain he had caused. You are still my grandson. You are still part of this family, and nothing can take that away. I've always been proud of you, no matter the circumstances of your birth. As the gravity of Arthur's words settled in, Caroline wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her anger quickly morphing into a deep sadness. I just don't understand why you didn't trust us enough to share this. We could have faced it together as a family. Arthur nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I failed you both. I thought protecting you meant hiding the truth, but I see now that it only caused more distance between us. I should have had faith in your strength to deal with the truth. Jason's expression softened, though the confusion still lingered. So what about Mom? Did she know? Arthur hesitated, the memories of his late daughter-in-law flooding back. She did know, but she didn't want to burden you with the knowledge. It was her decision to keep it a secret, and I went along with it. But I see now that it was wrong. You deserve to know who you are, where you come from. Silence engulfed the room, as both siblings processed their grandfather's revelation. The past seemed to unravel as they struggled to piece their identities back together. Caroline glanced at Jason, her heart aching for the brother who had faced his own demons in silence. This doesn't change how we feel about you, Arthur. You were there for us when we needed you most. You gave us love when we had so little. Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to feel right now. It changes everything, and nothing at the same time. Arthur reached out, placing his hand on Jason's shoulder. I understand, Jason. It's a lot to take in, but I want you to know that my love for you has never wavered. You are still my family, and I will always be here for you. Caroline's gaze shifted to the window, where the leaves continued to fall gently to the ground. I just wish Mom were here. She would have known how to handle this. Maybe she could have explained it better. Arthur nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the past. Your mother loved you both deeply, and she wanted nothing more than for you to have a happy life. The truth may be painful, but it can also set us free. It's time we embrace it and heal together. As the three of them sat in the dim light of the room, a newfound understanding began to blossom amidst the chaos of emotions. The air was thick with unspoken words, but there was a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could mend the fractures of their family. I want to know more, Jason finally said, his voice steadier. I want to understand where I came from. Maybe this is the path to finding my own identity. And I want to be a part of this too, Caroline added, her determination shining through the sadness. We can navigate this together, as a family. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. Arthur looked at them, a sense of pride swelling within him. That's all I ever wanted, to see you both united, to see you support one another. We may have started from a place of secrets, but we can build a future based on truth and love. As they shared their thoughts and feelings, the bond that had seemed irreparably broken began to weave itself back together. They laughed, cried, and began to heal, realizing that family was not solely defined by blood, but by the love and connection they shared. In that small room filled with sunlight, Arthur, Caroline, and Jason forged a new beginning, embracing the complexities of their family story with open hearts. A new chapter awaited them, one filled with the possibility of forgiveness, understanding, and an unbreakable bond. And as they sat together, the chill of the autumn air was replaced by the warmth of rekindled love. promising a future where they could stand together, undeterred by the shadows of the past.